Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. So in this one we're going to be breaking down my team selection for game week 4, as well as a second half of the video where I cover fixture analysis for game weeks 5 to 8 from both an attacking standpoint and a defensive standpoint. Now if you've tuned into the content before and a similar video to this, normally what I do is have a look at possible transfer targets, but as I think with most managers including my own, this game week doesn't necessarily need much overhaul in terms of our teams, right? So I thought maybe what would be a little bit more valuable is to go through the fixture analysis instead and break down potential player options that way. So let's have a look at the team first of all that I've got going into game week 4. So overall very happy with the team, currently sat on 172 overall points with a current rank of 2.8 million. At this point really, with 3 weeks in, I'm not reading too much into that though. I think that post wildcard I'd be much more disappointed if I had more red arrows, but moving forward I think we're only going to increase a little bit here, especially with 10 out of my 11 players playing in favourable home fixtures. So I've got no hits planned this week, 0.7 million in the bank and a squad value of 99.7 million. So in nets we've got Sanchez. I think Brighton offering a fantastic amount of defensive value both in the first 3 weeks and moving forward all the way up to game week 8. I anticipate the Leeds fixture may be a little bit tricky. It is at the Amex though. They looked obviously fantastic against Chelsea from an attacking standpoint, so we'll see what they can do against a well-drilled, well-organised Potter Brighton side. So hopefully he comes in with at least 6 points again, with of course that potential to rise higher with save points and bonus as he did last week. Then moving into the defence, we've got Trent, Walker, Trippier and James. Trippier really was only one of the potential options as a transfer out for me, but on the back of a 6-pointer against City, I think to be honest it's a much more favourable fixture, although being the only away fixture this week, I think he can do some damage to Wolves. So yeah, he makes the side. With Trent, Walker and James, I do anticipate we should see a few more returns from them. I would like the look of James against that Leicester side and Trent against Bournemouth. I think both of them respectively, as long as James starts at right wing back especially, both of them can start looking to bring us in those all-important attacking returns again. Moving into the midfield then, captain armband currently on Mo Salah against a very favourable Bournemouth fixture at home. Although Liverpool don't seem to be ticking fully as a squad, this man still comes up with the goods from an FPL perspective. I mean, if you did watch the Manchester United and Liverpool game on Monday, he pretty much was shut out by Malacia and Martinez for most of the time in that Old Trafford game, but still managed to contribute to the game, scoring the only goal Liverpool managed to get, meaning 8 points. So from an FPL standpoint, so definitely well worth the captaincy, I think, against the Bournemouth side that haven't looked great defensively. Moving into the rest of the midfield then, I do still have Saka and Mason Mount. I'm kind of trusting them in one more week. I don't like the sideways moves, and I think Rodrigo is still maybe 1 week too early for me in terms of a downgrade. So Saka and Mount do make the team again. Unfortunately, Mount's dropped all the way down to 7.8 now, but you know, I'm confident that we can make up the value in the wild card week anyway, so not a problem there. Pascal Gross also remains in the side after that transfer in last week. Happy that he returned with an assist last week, a net increase of 4 points after transferring Neto out to him, so hopefully he can continue the good attacking streak against Leeds at home. We've then got Jesus and Haaland both up front, arguably also two captain choices, and if you do go with them then good luck, as I think arguably they have the statistics and the expected points and all the good stuff really to point in the right direction in terms of a point scoring opportunity. I just think that Salah pips it for me in terms of the captaincy. And last but not least, in terms of the bench, I will only mention really Andreas there as a potential option. I think a lot of managers do own him, so if he is there's no bench headaches here for me or tricky decisions this week as there was last week, but I think if you've got other fires to put out in your team, there is, and you only want to use one transfer or one of your 2 free transfers potentially, I think Andreas can come in against Arsenal and still potentially score a nice 2 points, could be 5 if he racks himself in an assist and maybe some potential bonus as well. I think as a filling option, as a playable bench option, he still fills that gap nicely. So I don't think he needs to come into my team, but certainly would understand any managers bringing him in to the starting 11 for this week. So just something to consider if you have him as well. And next up, in terms of the section of the video here, I'm going to put up the fixture difficulty ranking for 6 teams from an attacking output, first of all, between game weeks 5 and game weeks 8. So just as a summary as to why I've included it this way rather than specific player options, is I felt that for my team, and I know that a lot of managers are also the same, we're not necessarily forced into a transfer this week, right? Our teams look good on paper. They look like they don't really need any surgery, bar injuries or any press conference news that we get over the course of the day and tomorrow. So I think ultimately we need to be looking that one step ahead for game week 5. And the reason why I've scaled it to game week 8 is because any transfers I make, especially if it's two of those two free transfers I'll be bringing in to game week 5 with me, I want to be bringing in players up until my wildcard week. So at the moment, I'm looking at game week 9. I think also a lot of managers will agree that seems to be the most optimal. We'll have a lot of information based on the international break, increases in terms of price, decreases. We can catch a lot of it when we press that button. So I think ultimately that is the week that I'll be doing it. Now, because that's the case for me, and again, also many of you, I believe as well, I think it's worth noting the fixtures across these next 4 weeks from game week 5 onwards. And potentially the players that I'll mention across each of these teams can come into our thinking. Of course, we can't get everybody, but it's good to see the detail on screen here, I think, and hopefully helps your decision making from next week onwards. So first team on the list here is Bournemouth. Some favourable fixtures here to some degree, but I think ultimately game week 7 and game week 8, remember this is from an attacking output, Brighton and Newcastle have looked actually very, very good defensively. So I mean, Brighton in general don't concede too much. They've only conceded I think 1 or 2 goals max. Newcastle looking good, of course, conceding 3 against City, but it's Manchester City, and they've done well in the other 2 games prior to that. Bournemouth, from an attacking standpoint, though, aren't looking as threatening enough to potentially push Brighton or Newcastle into a failure of a clean sheet, right? So I think Bournemouth, from an attacking standpoint, is an ignore for me. Even though their fixtures look great, I haven't seen enough from them from an eye test and a statistical standpoint to target any of their players. So we'll move into Brighton first of all. And they've got Fulham, Leicester, Bournemouth and Crystal Palace. Now, 3 people really, I think, to note here in terms of attacking threat, and that would be Pascal Gross, Leandro Trossard and Danny Welbeck. I think all 3 of those really are very, very good options from a Brighton attacking standpoint. I think all of them statistically look like they can do something. Of course, Pascal Gross, he's not on penalties anymore, which is a little bit disappointing. Well, I say anymore, he potentially could if McAllister's not on the field, but ultimately it looks like he's ahead of him in that penalty taking choice. So he's potentially a little bit less value, but ultimately Trossard and Welbeck at similar price points in different positions, I think also offer tremendous value, especially looking at those fixtures. So I think any one of those 3 can come into our thinking if you haven't already moved to Pascal Gross in your squad. Third on the list then, the team is Manchester United, looking very, very promising against Liverpool, but I'd still say it's a hold fire for at least another week until we can show a little bit more consistency. We've got a slightly easier fixture against Southampton tomorrow afternoon, but we'll see on the outputs of the players and where Erik ten Hag sets up. So I think there's 4 players overall that I could mention in terms of potential transfers in, which is Rashford, Sancho, Fernandes and of course Martial. So couple of things to note against each player, really. I think Rashford looked really, really good against Liverpool. He was running in behind, looking like Rashford of old, really. Not necessarily taking on players anymore like he used to be able to, although he did get some fortune in terms of breaking free and getting some shots at Alisson. But overall, I think he's a very, very good option. Now dropping down to, I believe, as far as 6.3 million, which could be a great option as an alternative to Rodrigo if you fancy that. As you can see, they're above Leeds on the fixture list here. You've then got Jadon Sancho, a little bit more expensive at 7.3, but both of them, in terms of the goals scored, were very composed, great finishes, and I think arguably both of them have great potential over those next 4 weeks. You could say that in game week 6, the Arsenal fixture there is potentially maybe a grey fixture. Arsenal are looking very, very good defensively so far. They did look a little bit, kind of on the edge with the Palace game on the initial game of the season, but ultimately it looks like they've tidied a few areas up, and Arteta's squad looking very, very promising. So potentially that's the only fixture there that is maybe a bit of a question mark over its difficulty rating, but the other 3 I think have definitely got goals in there from an attacking standpoint. Moving on to Bruno Fernandes, I think really I would only consider him because of his price point being so awkward. Although he's dropped in price now to 9.9, it feels a little bit too difficult to get to him because there isn't many people around him that you can move to beyond that. You could try and go even further up to a De Bruyne and a Son should their form or fixtures dictate it. But ultimately, I think the only appeal I would have for Bruno over, say, Rashford or Sancho is that he potentially gets back on penalties if Ronaldo isn't on the pitch, which is looking less and less likely, or he leaves the team entirely. And that kind of leads me into the Martial decision making as well. If Ronaldo leaves, then I think Martial becomes an outright kind of number 9 option really for Ten Hag. So they're kind of the 4 players I would think about. The only maybe downside again to Bruno, he's also not on as many direct free kicks anymore with Eriksen coming in the team. He looks like he's pulled rank on a couple of games that I've watched. So we'll have to see how that turns out. But they're the 4 guys from an attacking standpoint for United. Crystal Palace next. Again, some favourable fixtures there. There's only 2 real individuals I would probably be looking at from an attacking standpoint here in Eze and Zaha. I don't think from the striker position really, Mateta, Edouard have really got enough solid minutes in terms of rotation risk and kind of really an attacking threat to consider them at the moment. And with a lot of people's structures, a mid-price midfielder seems like an easier slot, especially if you've only got 1 free transfer, right? So I think Eze is a consideration. Really, he's very, very creative. He looks great from an eye test perspective. He's really attacking, but I'm not too sure yet whether that constitutes into FPL points. For me, he's a bit more of a wait and see. Whereas Zaha, he has shown how consistent he can be, even against tricky opponents. So coming up with City in game week 4, we'll have to see what he does. But beyond that, Brentford, Newcastle, United and Brighton, again, facing arguably 2 very good defensive sides in Newcastle and Brighton at the moment. But he loves a goal against Man United. I could see goals in that Brentford game as well. At 7.1 million, he's on penalties. He just looks like a great option, right? So I think those 2 are the only considerations for me for Palace. Moving then into Manchester City. Of course, game week 5 is a midweek fixture. So Pep Guardiola has already stated that Erling Haaland may become a rotation risk or a minute risk, and he's not necessarily going to start this game. We'll have to maybe wait and see closer to the deadline of this if we make a decision to transfer him out, but potentially I would still want to target Manchester City's attack, and the only route really that I can see as an alternative is in that midfield slot, and that would either be Phil Foden, Kevin De Bruyne, or Ilkay Gundogan. So I think all those 3 options are very, very solid choices. Again, it just depends on minutes. So Foden and De Bruyne, you would argue, are probably maybe even at the same level of risk as Haaland, potentially a little bit less. And then Gundogan has been given the captaincy, so maybe he is the most solid option of the 3 to go for if we do decide to go down that road. If not, I'm very happy to take Haaland into the Forest fixture. If I know he's going to get maybe at least half a match, maybe 30 minutes, he could still provide some very, very good returns for us in that game. So he may not get transferred out there either, but still something to consider in game week 5 onwards. Then we move into Leeds finally. So again, Rodrigo has been on the watch list previously. In fact, he was there prior to the Chelsea match, and then go and look what he did. They've now got a maybe arguably trickier fixture against Brighton away, which I'm kind of leaning towards. I think he may blank in that game, but I thought the same against Chelsea, and look what he did. So I'll definitely eat my words if that's the case. But I think I'm going to just wait 1 more week with him. And as mentioned, you can see here that United's fixtures on the ticker are a little bit more favourable than Leeds from game week 5 to 8. So potentially, as I said, Rashford could be an option as an alternative to him at a very similar price point should you decide to go for that game week 5 onwards, right? So just something to consider. And that's the attacking fixtures said and done. So the other half, we do need to look at the flip side because it's easy to do an overall fixture ticker, but defensively, you'll see that there are some changes within the top 6 table. Of course, we have some that are staying put in Bournemouth, Brighton and Palace. They keep their 1st, 2nd and 4th slot respectively in the ticker, but City move up to 3rd, Leeds move up to the 5th place, and we have a new contender in Arsenal for the 6th slot there, and United drop out completely from a defensive standpoint. So moving through the teams then, Bournemouth from a defensive standpoint, as mentioned in their attack, I don't consider them a team that we should be investing in just yet. I think even though the fixture ticker looks good, I don't think that their assets have proven anything really to us to get them into our thinking. With Brighton, on the other hand, I do believe that either Robert Sanchez or Lewis Dunk Dunk could be perfect options for your team. I think Robert Sanchez is an ideal replacement for Iverson or Ward, should you have gone with the double up of Leicester goalkeepers at the beginning of the season. I think really, if you haven't got any fires to put out, and you've ultimately tried to roll the transfer like I am in game week 4 to 5, I would recommend, I think, using at this point one of those transfers on Ward or Iverson to bring in Robert Sanchez. I think those defensive fixtures look great. I think he's already showcased what he can do from a save perspective as well, bringing in the bonus points as well so far. So I think he's a solid option. If you've already got Sanchez, I wouldn't necessarily recommend the double up with Lewis Dunk, but still Lewis Dunk is a great, in my opinion, route into the Brighton defence. He's absolutely nailed. Potentially not as much maybe attacking threat as other 4.5 or 5 million defenders, but a great asset nonetheless over those fixtures in the next 4 weeks. Moving then into Manchester City next up, I think most of us as managers have either got at least one Manchester City defender or a double up at this point. And I think, to be honest, I answered this question really, I think in my game week 3 breakdown, that I don't think big at the back is completely dead. I think Cancelo and Walker or Cancelo and Ederson is still a viable duo, moving especially into those favourable 4 fixtures ahead of us. Tottenham have got a little bit maybe of threat to add here, but Nottingham Forest, Villa and Wolves, all teams that haven't necessarily been on the score sheet in terms of high levels. So you could easily see 3 out of 4 clean sheets for them. And of course, with someone like João Cancelo, there's absolutely every opportunity that we get attacking returns as well, of course. So I definitely think that those City assets from a defensive output are still very, very important. Moving into the Palace defence next, I would say that they're similar in terms of the Bournemouth thinking. Really, for me, there isn't any standout picks in terms of the eye test or what somebody has produced from an FPL standpoint so far. I think Mitchell could be an option if you wanted a Palace defender, but really, I think those fixtures are much better to attack from an attacking standpoint rather than defence. So I think we can pretty much ignore both those and Bournemouth. Same for Leeds. Really, I think there's not really been a standout pick for me. Dallas was definitely the standout pick of previous, but ultimately Leeds from a defensive standpoint, if you've chosen to go with Meslier in goal from the beginning, I don't think it's the worst choice. I still think these fixtures offer a tremendous amount of opportunity for clean sheet or save points for him. He really does get himself about. There was a couple of chances Chelsea had that he got down to and up to quite nicely. So I think he is a solid option if you've got him. So I wouldn't even necessarily consider him as a transfer out. But I also wouldn't necessarily consider him as a transfer in either. So moving into Arsenal next, I think really there's a couple of options, but I think Zinchenko, Saliba and Gabriel are the 3 standouts for me. You could argue that Tomiyasu, if he comes into play, Tierney, maybe Ben White, but there's a little bit of uncertainty around, especially Tierney and White's minutes. I do expect Tomiyasu maybe to get back into the team once he's fit, but and Ben White potentially drops out for the first choice of Saliba based on his performances, but we'll have to wait and see. I also do think Ramsdale is an option. The only argument I have against that is that Gabriel, Zinchenko and Saliba pretty much offer, I think, more chance for attacking opportunities and bonus points. Ramsdale doesn't seem to be having to make any saves, although he does make very good saves when he's forced to. Unless he makes at least 3 in a game, then ultimately the bonus point system isn't going to favour him. You'd also argue, because Arsenal at the moment are so good attacking, what that tends to do is hurt defenders, especially if they're keeping a clean sheet. The attackers seem to get the favoured attacking returns. So if Zinchenko, for example, got an assist and the clean sheet on a 3-0 victory, it's highly likely that he gets more bonus points than, let's say, a Ramsdale at just a slightly cheaper option, right? So I think ultimately those are I would choose outfield defenders for Arsenal rather than Ramsdale if I had to make a transfer for them. But again, I hope this has been valuable to you. It's not exactly the same type of format that I usually do, where I talk about specific players and maybe some of their statistics. I think really I'll leave the watch list for that in terms of a deep dive. But ultimately, like I say, even if you're just carrying the one transfer into game week 5, I personally think that it could be used as that kind of maybe mini wild card, 2 to 3 transfers that we can use to attack this run of fixtures for that all-important wild card that comes up around about game week 9. So let me know your thoughts in the comments if you did like the format of this video. If anybody that I've mentioned has come into your thinking, or maybe you've already transferred them in for game week 4. Let me know in the comments, guys, what your thoughts are, and good luck for game week 4. I will be doing a deadline stream tomorrow, so feel free to tune into that from 10 AM tomorrow. And of course, as always, guys, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing to me. And if you do enjoy this content as well, please smash that like button. So take care for now, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.